Hello, everyone. Welcome. By the way, I'm just loving Michael the Afrobeats transitions. Just saying. Um, it's Wednesday. Really excited to be here. We're just gonna wait for more people to join, and as I do that, I'm just gonna introduce myself. Well, my name is Maylis Djikalou. I use she/her pronouns. And I'm actually checking in currently from the rainforest in Cote d'Ivoire. So if you hear cockerels, if you hear strange birds or strange noises, that's me. Apologies for that in advance. I'm a transformational coach and consultant. And for the last 10 years, well, I've been working at the intersection of mental health and creative industries, supporting businesses, future leaders to make more of an impact through courageous conversations. And the reason why you're here is because, well, I'm also the program director at We Create Space. And a bit about us. Well, we offer self-empowerment platforms, which some of you are aware with our activities, but we're focusing on the needs and unique needs of LGBTQ plus professionals and allies. And these learning and development experiences really are here to support essentially all employees with becoming more impactful, more authentic version of themselves in their community and organizations. Today, actually, though, I'm really excited to host our second Queer Perspective panel. And for those of you who weren't here last time, well, Queer Perspectives is just our monthly series of live panel discussions centered around the queer experience. It's essentially a virtual space for queer voices to, sorry about that, to share fresh perspectives and just empower the wider community through conversation and storytelling. Little shout out to Zoom for sponsoring this event. But essentially the topic today is about family matters and queer parenting. And I'm joined by some amazing panelists from our queer collective. And I'll go around very quickly for introductions. But for everybody else in the space, if you want to check in the chat, just tell us where you're from, where you're joining, how you're feeling. It's always kind of nice to know that we're all together in this space. But I'm going to start with the introduction. So Chloe, Jack, Yanni, can you just tell us a bit about yourself, name, pronouns, how you identify, where you're based, what you do, and also a bit about your family situation. So I'm going to start with Chloe.
Thanks, Maylis. We talked about this, of me starting first, not just because my name begins with a C. My name is Chloe Davies. I identify as bisexual. My pronouns are she, her. I'm currently in the office, so I'm hiding out in an office in Farringdon, which is where I work. My day job, I'm head of social impact for Lucky Generals, who are an advertising agency. And my family, I am mother of sons. I have two boys. Miles is 5, Theo is 3. Miles is a superhero. He is autistic and nonverbal. So I am a neurodiverse mum too. I'm kind of looking through his lens, as well as having a more able-bodied child who copied his brother. So actually Theo speaks more English than Miles, but is delayed because actually he learned Miles's language first. So that's how the two of them choose to speak to each other when I'm trying to discipline them and me. And it's actually then breaking that down into what they really mean. So yeah, every day is a journey, which I'm trying to do with a smile, but also because the makeup is hiding that I'm slightly tired. But that's parenting, right?
Thank you, Chloe, landing us in a very authentic space, a reflection of your experience. I'm going to go to Jack next.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jack Lopez. My pronouns are he, they. How do I identify? It's Tuesday. I don't know. I am a trans man. I am a bit non-binary as well. I identify as 100% queer. Can't narrow it down any more than that. I live in West Yorkshire in the UK, in a little town just kind of in between Leeds and Manchester, and I work at the University of Bradford. My day job is Associate Dean in Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, and lecturer in Society and Health. So I'm based in social sciences, and I'm a medical anthropologist. Lots of long words there, which basically mean I'm very nosy and I inquire into people's lives all the time and try and understand humans and the human condition, and very much related to body and health and stuff like that. I also volunteer on the Health Strategy Board for Transsexual UK. I'm occasionally a public speaker, an activist campaigner, and a trainer on awareness around trans health as well. So when I'm not doing that, I am at home with 4 children. I am a lone parent. I didn't start off as a lone parent. I've been a lone parent for around 2.5, 3 years now. So I've got 4 children, a 13-year-old, 11-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 6-year-old. So I think we can definitely say I am thoroughly outnumbered in my house. We're consistently kind of managing this fine line between Lord of the Flies and something else. The day, hopefully my children haven't tuned in today, but the day they actually figure out that they do actually outnumber me and there'd be very little I could do if there was a complete revolt, is the day that I've completely lost. Luckily they've not figured that out, so everything's fine. But yeah, in between work and home, I'd say, you know, much like Chloe, I'm consistently tired but happy, loving and not so loving the whole parenting journey on a daily basis.
So real, Jack. I'm excited that we get to actually become nosy ones into your life and your experience. So that's awesome. Yanni, tell us about yourself.
Hey, Maylis, and hello, everyone. My name is Yanni Toivola. My pronouns are he, him, and I identify as gay man, and I'm based in Helsinki, Finland. I'm half Finnish. My mother is from Finland and my dad is from Kenya, but I grew up in Finland. I was born and raised here and only found my Kenyan family in my 30s. But now I have a whole big family, my aunts and my uncles, and even my grandfather is alive in Kenya. So that's been a wonderful journey in terms of my sort of whole identity. I'm an actor, performer, a writer. I've written 3 books about identity and about parenting and about love and relationships, and they're all sort of memoir genre. So I use a lot of my own life and different stories and explorations of my own identity and my life. But then I also try to connect it to the bigger world and things that I think other people would be interested in as well. I was an MP also in Finland for 8 years. I was the first Black member of the Finnish parliament. So I'm very proud to carry that title. Though at the same time, I also have to always remind people that kind of when you're the first, it means that you're alone. So I was also 8 years the mostly only person in the room, which is in itself its own experience as well. I also became a father when I was an MP. I think it was my 3rd year as an MP when I became a father. So my daughter is now 7 years old. In our day-to-day life, I'm a single parent, but sort of our family model is that we are co-parenting with her mother. So she has a mother as well, and they have their own relationship. They see each other maybe 2 times a month for the weekend. But I've been the one living with her since the day she was born, and I've been raising her, and I mostly make all the decisions sort of concerning her everyday life. And yeah, like I said, I became a father when I was an MP, and I was the first person who identifies as male who took this parental leave also from the parliament, which meant that I had to go and see the Speaker of the House, because there was no sort of guideline how the parliament is reacting to this new kind of model of being a parent, which felt kind of strange at the time to go and see the Speaker of the House and sort of share your personal. This was still, we were pregnant, and not even everybody in my close family still knew that I'm going to really be a father. And then I'm going to meet the Speaker of the House and share the news But it was something that somebody else suggested to me that it's what I should do because it was the first case. So then that kind of opens the door for others as well. Yeah, and now my daughter is almost 8 years old and she goes to school and yeah, it's work life. Now I'm back in art. I left politics, so I'm at the moment rehearsing a new play in a theater and developing a TV series and enjoying my new freedom and activism on the other side.
Wow. I mean, thank you for sharing that, Yanni, and all of you. And you all sound so busy, I have to say. And Yanni as well, that piece that you talked about being the first one and changing the framework, I'm really excited to get into as we go through the conversation. But really where I wanted to kind of start off is just setting the scene essentially. And I know as queer people, there's often like a lack of representation when it comes to parenting, right? And I mean, I'm super curious in my own experience as a West African bisexual woman who's currently on that kind of trajectory, like very straight down path to dealing with parenting. And I'm finding I'm spending so much time in therapy processing what that is. And maybe also the space feels a bit alone sometimes. So I wanted to talk to the three of you and see if you could actually start sharing, you know, what that kind of exploration period was like for you. Like, what is it that kind of inspired the desire to become a parent, or essentially maybe what led you to embrace the path fully? And I'm going to start with you, Jack, to kind of set us off.
Okay, you might, I do tend to waffle, so you might need to wave your hands at me if I start kind of going on. It's, yeah, mine's quite an interesting journey, but I pick up on what you say about the need for therapy there. I'll touch on that in a minute, it's incredibly important. I was never having children. It wasn't on my radar. It wasn't anything that I'd ever really thought about. I grew up as always knowing that I was queer, but not recognizing the other facets of me around my gender and around my transness. I grew up in the 90s, and everything was about sexuality. There was nothing about gender. So I know now, I think a lot of my detachment from my body and my misunderstanding about myself around that time, I think a lot links to dysphoria in terms of why I never thought I wanted children, why I didn't see myself as somebody that could care. And it wasn't until I was in my late 20s really that it even entered into my head. And it's strange how I'm, and as an anthropologist, I'm fascinated by this. There is something biological, it's not determinant due to sex or gender. It is deeply biological. And I say this because although I never wanted children, I come from a very big family. And I remember as I got into my teens, when some of my aunties had children, I would go and visit them in the hospital, and I would cry when I saw a newborn baby. And I would be stood there going, what am I crying for? It's a thing, and I was telling myself that I had no feelings towards this small being, yet my body's reaction was to cry. And I never understood that. So yeah, that's kind of, I grew up just thinking it wasn't for me, that was fine. And then I moved to Mexico in my mid-20s and fell in love with somebody on site. Yet another chemical reaction. I met a complete stranger whose language I did not speak. They did not speak my language, and I became obsessed with this person and instantly wanted to have children. From that moment on, something just made me go, I don't know, something exploded inside my uterus, started a party, and there we go. And all of a sudden I wanted children, and I wanted lots of children. And it was really interesting because I never sat there and thought, because it was so new to me, I was just obsessed about just wanting a child. And I thought more about that urge within my physicalness and my body than I did about what it meant for me to be a parent. I grew up in an incredibly cis het family. Still to this day, nobody in my family admits to being queer. I cannot be the only one. I refuse to believe. I've got 36 cousins. I am not the only queer person. But that was my only example. But what I did grow up around, although a lot, you know, with the heteronormativity and a misunderstanding of transness, that it was an incredibly accepting family, and it's a family full of love. And actually, it's all that I took on, understanding what it meant to be a parent, you know, and a lot of kind of just finishing there around that. I just want to end on what you were saying about kind of thinking about therapy at the minute. And I think what helped me go through a lot of my sexuality and burgeoning understanding of my gender around this time was that the midwives that I had in Mexico were we'd understand them in the UK as independent midwives. They had mixed cultural models of midwifery taken from all over the world. And all of my initial prenatal appointments with my first child were therapy sessions. There was no touching me, there was no poking around, there was none of that kind of stuff in a medical model. I had 2-hour prenatal sessions with midwives, exploring my background, exploring my identity, thinking about, they got me to go and ask my mother about her birth, my grandmother, going through the whole intergenerational idea. And actually that is what prepared me, I think, for being a parent, was focusing on the first time in my life exploring my history and my past and my relationship to my body.
Wow, such a wild, I think wild in terms of just the diversity and you know, the involvement of the various people, and culturally how that varied in the impact. I'm wondering, Chloe, what's that story been like for you? What's that journey been like?
Mine is the complete opposite to Jack. I come from a very large family on both sides. My mum's Nigerian, my dad's part Sierra Leone, part American. So I've always grown up with like cousins, and I'm referred to as the little wife in my family. Like, I've wanted to have kids since I can remember, but I have known from 9 that I was bisexual, but not necessarily having the words for it. And so I actually always thought, in my mind, when you imagine like what your relationships will look like, I actually thought I'd have a wife. Like, for me, when I look to my future, it always looked for me like I would have a wife. Strangely, at university, I walked into the canteen on my way to lunch, and I heard this guy laugh. And I looked, and my whole being went, uh-oh, you're in trouble. And 20 plus years later, that's a whole nother story. But we have 2 children. For 8 years, so I have really bad polycystic ovaries. And in 2015, so yeah, I'd had a full breakdown in 2008, and I had polycystic ovaries, and I had episode. So basically, someone who has polycystic ovaries means that most women's ovaries are about this big. Polycystic ovaries are double inflamed, and when you have your cycle and the egg is going around, it normally breaks apart. That's how we have a period. That's the most bastardized version. Unfortunately, with polycystic ovaries, it continues to collect. It doesn't break apart, and it can become a cyst that grows and grows and grows and then explodes. So that's actually what happened. They thought that I had appendicitis. They were getting ready to take me down to the theatre to operate. I stopped bleeding, and then they went, oh, maybe we should do an ultrasound. And what started from that was that I had a gynecologist who said, you know, I treated you like I treated all my patients, but each patient is individual. He changed my pill from microkinin to Yasmin. And if you understand polycystic ovaries, it's a hormone imbalance. So I have a lot more testosterone than I should do in my genetic makeup. Yasmin is a pill that actually has slightly more estrogen, although they don't actually tell you that part. So I already had that bit. Then he put me on metformin, which is also an estrogen-based drug. So it's double dosing. I ended up with a DVT the size of a small football behind my left knee. Unbeknownst to us at the time, I also had a cyst. I also had a pulmonary embolism, which was the size of a golf ball, on my left lung that had traveled from the DVT on my knee. And then I had a tiny bit, probably about that big, that had gone into my right lung. So when they discovered the DVT, they started me on warfarin. I was on 10 milligrams a day, which is the highest legal amount you're allowed to take. Warfarin is basically essentially rat poison. And the pulmonary embolism tried to go back the way that it came, and I had a premature heart attack at 25. So they basically said, if you ever want to have kids, it will probably most likely be via IVF. My cycles were, I would have a cycle every 6 months. So everything that in essence had been a fundamental part of who I was, this kind of like being this mummy person with all my friends, I had to kind of put it to one side because I never actually knew whether that was going to happen again or not. So for 8 years, stopped thinking about being a mum as best as I possibly could and just tried to imagine a completely different life for myself. And then in 2015, I had an amazing doctor who basically said, look, I'm going to treat you myself. And he said, okay, let's try and get your cycle back. So I was like, right, okay, whatever you think, because everything else doesn't work. I'm like the genetic anomaly. They say like this should work for everybody else, and my body's like, try something else. So we tried like different types of contraceptive pill, nothing, you name it, wouldn't work, you know. And inherently it was so desperate to create, not to recreate, but to better the experience that I had as a child. You know, I had a lovely childhood, middle part not so great, and you want to have for me, I wanted to have a family to be able to, like, that love that I had with my cousins, to be able to recreate that for my own family. So I was like, right, okay. And unbeknownst to all of us, I had a gynecologist appointment. She didn't actually do an examination. If she had, things might have been very different. And unbeknownst to everybody else, I was pregnant. Wow. So high-risk pregnancy, I had to inject with Clexane the whole way through, which is an anomaly of itself. The real barrier for my identity came from my conversation with my midwife. One, I have a very convoluted medical history. Then putting my LGBT identity on top of that in the conversations around, you know, who I am, what am I doing, blah, blah, blah. And in the end, I was at Homerton, I had to demand that I have the same midwife the whole way through, which isn't normally done, but I was really lucky, and she stuck with me. And it wasn't until I actually had Miles, so I tried for 25 hours, I try not to scare anyone, 25 hours, 1 centimeter, minute apart, latent contractions, 1 centimeter dilated. That boy was happy where he was, didn't want to leave. They tried everything, pessary. In the end, they broke my waters, and he pooed. So they said, emergency. Oh my God. They were like, oh, look, he's pooed. So, you know, got to have an emergency C. And there was me like, I'm going to have a natural birth. It's going to be great. Like, I'm finally pregnant, Earth Mother. I'm going to do all the things. And they were like, no, you have to have like an emergency section. I'm not going to lie. I should have had that from the beginning. It was amazing. My anaesthetist, Dr. Wong, was fantastic. And when I had Miles, the senior consultant for Homerton came down and she said, you know, Chloe, do you know that you've got polycystic ovaries? I said, yes. She said, do you know you've got cyst? I said, no. Basically on my left ovary, left tube, I had massive cyst that flipped, whole thing had transversed, the tube had flapped around it and it all gone gangrenous. So they said, 1, we don't know how you managed to conceive in the first place. 2, to carry full term. And 3, we've got to amputate. And so I think,
Chloe, I'm just going to pause you there because I'm hearing the whole journey of, you know, how the impact it had on your health, your own journey to conception, and how even, you know, the integration with the medical system, your identity, your health was just such a challenging process. And I'm just really curious as well, if you don't mind, Chloe, we're just going to jump to Yanni and kind of see where that kind of lands, because I know Yanni was like this, like listening, and I'm wondering, Yanni, in terms of your own experience, did anything kind of, you know, resonate, or what was that kind of journey like to you embracing parenting?
Yeah, I think there were, thanks for asking, and I think there were a lot of things that sort of resonates with me, of course, through my own story and my identity, but I guess it's all these different layers, that we're never only one thing, you know, at the time, but it's all these different layers of our identity that I think all sort of also come up at this time when you become a parent, because it's such a big transition and change in your life. But if I think about me and how I ever sort of started thinking about parenting, I feel like almost my first answer would be that it's been a journey that took my whole life, or that I was really young when for the first time I already knew that I would like to be a parent, a father. I think I was like 7 or 8 or something, that I became aware that this is something that you could sort of pursue. And and I really loved being with other children, and always I was taking care of smaller children. And it was kind of in my identity, kind of the part that I was the most proudest of and most secure of. Like I felt that so many things in my life were sort of unsure, and there was shame and fear, but I somehow felt that this this identity that wanted to be a parent was very clear to me. At the time, I wasn't aware, maybe even, that there would be a conflict later with that dream and then other parts of my identity. But at the time, it was very strong in me. Then later, maybe when I was 10 or 11, I realized that I'm gay, and that's when the conflict came, because then I was told that this is not possible to combine these two things. I thought that I have to choose. Either I need to become straight and be a parent, or then I'm going to be gay, and then I have to sort of give up this dream about becoming a parent. And then my solution as a teenager was that I tried not to move anywhere. Like if I just stand still, I don't have to make a choice. And what standing still meant that I sort of stopped living my life at the time when everybody else around me, all my friends were exploring and, dreaming about life and making plans. And I just kind of tried to be like motionless and not think about anything, because I was so afraid of that moment when I would have to make some kind of a choice. But then luckily, when I was 20 years old, I moved to New York, study acting. And on the side, I was working in a restaurant. And the first day that I went there, I learned that one of the regular families who came to the restaurant 2 times a week was a family with 2 fathers, and they had a small daughter that they had adopted from Bolivia, and they were a family. And I never forget the moment when I saw them for the first time in the corner table, and when I realized that it's actually a family. And it was such a huge relief and such a moment of kind of like, I don't know, clarity. I think it was that one single moment that kind of took away all that conflict, all the shame, all the doubt. And all of a sudden, the path felt very clear, even though I still didn't know how I could actually become technically a parent. But it was like why I always share these stories, that I'm a big believer in images and pictures and these like how much we can offer to people with just visibility and the sort of single moments when we are able to see different kind of families that can really sort of open the door. And for me, what it opened was that I had the space to dream, to plan, to look for it, even really start that dialogue with myself that, okay, I had this dream about being a parent, but do I really want to be a parent? And I think that's what I've been sort of talking about a lot, is that we would all need to have the right for that space where we can explore our identity and go towards parenting and think that, is this something that I want to do or not? Then, of course, becoming a parent can be very tricky and difficult, and it's a fragile thing. So in a way, it's not something we can sort of demand when we talk about actually having a child. But to have that opportunity and space to dream is such a crucial stepping, like a turning point, for, at least for me. It still took me 16 years before I became a parent, but I felt that I carried that one single moment with me for 16 years. And it gave me a lot of strength in many moments. But then the actual moment when I actively started to think about having a family was actually so that my daughter's mother approached me and asked if I would be sort of interested in becoming a, co-parent and have a child together. We didn't really even know each other, and it felt strange for me first. And kind of that's also when all these old structures and models of how it is normal to start a family sort of came back to me. And I'm like, I don't know if you can really start a family like this with a stranger or with a person that you're not in a relationship with. So there was all these boundaries that even I had to myself sort of cross over, even though there was this dream and opportunity. Then we dated, so to say, for 6 months, which meant that we met every week and we just talked about life and who we are and what are we looking for in terms of sort of starting a family and being a parent. And for us, the most important thing was that we were very clear, that I was very clear that I want to be the person who's living with the child and be very close with my daughter. And for her, it was very clear that she wants to be a parent from a distance and kind of see the child, but not maybe live with the child. that was a good ground for us to sort of start the journey.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, then we luckily had our daughter.
Wow. You know what I really got from the three of you, as I was noting on this very crowded piece of paper, is like this idea of reframing what's possible. And, you know, with you, Yanni, and what you described was just that vision of the other family, that, you know, the gay family, that let you know that it was possible for you yourself to have a child. You know, Jack, with you was kind of like how reimagining like an approach to holistic health allowed you to connect with yourself and your experience. And with you, Chloe, even just shouting out to Phoebe's who made a comment there about, you know, you sharing your story about PCOS, but really how working with your body allowed you to find, you know, this dream essentially and have your children. And it's so interesting in hearing your stories because they're all so unique and very unique to you. But what I found quite interesting as well in thinking about queer parenting is that this is something as well that you said, Jack, in our pre-chat, is that how society doesn't kind of associate, you know, the idea of nurture, particularly with queer masculine people. And I wanted to kind of ask, and starting with you, Jack, and then going to Yanni and Chloe, I've got a special question for you. But essentially, so when navigating this heteronormative kind of world of parenting, what kind of gendered assumptions come up for you, Jack?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Many is what I would say, and I think it's interesting because I've gone through, you know, I would say that having my children is what empowered me to then come out of my house to the wider world and start medical transition. So I've gone through, you know, the transformative process of producing other human beings into the transformative process of producing myself and my gender as well. And my children have been along with me for the whole of that journey. So I've gone from the outside world not knowing about my gender and perceiving me as female and making assumptions about that, to now you know, being male and all the things that come along with that. So when I was perceived as female, it was very frustrating in terms of my head and my dysphoria, because people made lots of assumptions about, you know, the thing about you being a working mother at that time, you know, the assumptions put around that, and that there must be other women around looking after your children, but it must be so hard. It must be so hard because you must be torn with the emotion of leaving your children behind while you go to work. That there was a lot of that kind of my own transition, and I've noticed the shift nowadays is there's a lot less people caring about my emotions, leaving my children behind. It's just it's seen as a very practical thing, you know. It's seen as nobody asks me how I feel about, you know, the fact that from 7 a.m. till 8 p.m. my children have to be with somebody else, you know, because, you know, during semester I work about a 50-hour week. Nobody cares about my feelings anymore. You know, poor me, it's a tiny violin. So there are things around that. There are also complete misunderstandings about people will just want to shove you also into this kind of heteronormative family thing. So when you're trans and queer, so, you know, I don't know what it would be like if I was trans and straight, but I'm trans and queer, and people are like, oh, what do we do with these two things? You know, I live in a town where there's quite a lot of queer parents, but they're cis queer parents, and people know what to do with two women. They know what to do with two men. They'll deal with the sexuality separately, and then they'll fit them into a heteronormative model of parenting. And with me, they're like, oh, what do we do with this body and this thing? And you can just tell when you're in the playground or around the school that people aren't quite sure, that they're not quite sure. So I move around these assumptions, but yeah, I definitely say people don't expect the emotion from you as a masculine person is what I find, and I'm more aware when I'm out in public, and when I take my children away, you know, if we go kind of to the seaside or something, I'm a lot more aware of how I am physically in those spaces with them, and how I'm hugging them, how I'm holding them, you know, the having to let, you know, the girls go into toilets on their own, and you know, go and how I am with the others in male toilets. But it's also made me incredibly aware and astute to other fathers and how they are in public, and I now relate. I always used to speak to dads in the playground and stuff anyway, because it was just where I felt more comfortable, and I always felt more comfortable speaking to men because, you know, I'm a man, and even before starting transition in my head, that's how I saw the world. But I understand cis fathers so much more now, and I think that fatherhood is so misunderstood. And I'm talking about UK society here, and I'm talking about, you know, northern UK society. I think men are really, really misunderstood and dismissed a lot. That's the thing that I've picked up as now, you know, as male parents, definitely.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jack. There was so much in there. Yanni, anything from your side?
Yes, thank you, Jack, for sharing. And there were even some elements that I could relate to very easily, especially the end part. I think for me, the phrase that I've been thinking about sort of the past year is this male body experience, or gay male body experience. And where it comes from is that I started to think that, okay, now my daughter is 7 years old. And if I just look at my physical body, I feel that my body has changed in those 7 years so much because of being a parent, you know, because I've had this life that I've had to keep alive and nurture and take care and guide through life. She was I was her first skin to skin contact. And, you know, first when the baby is an infant, they can't walk. So I'm carrying the child everywhere. And I haven't carried the child, but still parenting has been a very tender and physical experience as well, that I can find different traces and marks in my body that can tell the life that we live together, and that I'm a parent. But I somehow feel that there's no really room in masculinity for this sort of body experience inside parenting, or how fully mental and physical experience it is, and sort of this nurturing side. So that's something that I feel that I more often, when I hear talk about parenting, I relate to mothers, or people who identify as women and their mothers. I more identify with their stories about parenting, or how we describe their journey. But then when I try to sort of come in, it's almost like, no, it's not your story. You're not a mother. And then you're kind of confused that, okay, where do I go? And then when I go to the men's side, I still feel that this sort of whole discussion about parenting, that it's so much like, it's so detached from the body experience, I think, or even to have this role of being a tender and nurturing parent. Maybe it's now like slowly changing. And of course you can see individual examples, but if you kind of look at the main story, I feel like it's still hard for me to sort of see where I could sort of place myself there. Yeah. But I don't know. Somehow I feel it's really given me an interesting lens to my own identity. So I'm also at the same time very grateful. And yeah, because I think it
Really.
also changes your perspective. Sorry, I'm just gonna say this one
No,
thing
go
that's
on,
still
Yanni.
in my mind about, because growing up, I so often felt that I'm like outside masculinity and I can't find my way in. But I think the parenting journey has kind of switched it so that now I'm almost feeling like I look at those men who I used to feel like are sort of oppressing me with their identity. But now sometimes I look at them and I feel like, oh, nobody has, they're lacking so much information and so much freedom and so much sort of space to move and exist that I'm actually maybe more free than some of sort of, for example, some straight cis men around me. Yeah.
Yeah. I think
anything on that, Jack?
yeah, I've just think just Yanni's words there of, you know, parenthood has given my masculinity tenderness, and it's given me the confidence to really embrace that, when I grew up really rejecting anything that you would associate with female nurturing behavior, because I didn't want to be associated with that. I didn't want to be seen that. And you know, my kids stop, they attach themselves. Children attach themselves to you. Children are like Velcro. We spend a lot of time going like that, but actually it is that physicality that just, I'm not scared of that side of myself anymore, and I would never admit that side of myself when people saw me. So I think it's yeah, I had this idea of the type of man that I had to be, and I have a freedom from that now, and the children have given me that. That's an amazing gift that they've given me, because they don't think like that, and what I have to think about is what they need from me. So yeah, definitely relate with what Yanni was saying there.
Wow. So much in there. And everyone, if you have a question towards the end, please drop it in the chat. I mean, this conversation is just like so enlightening, and I know we could go on forever, but Chloe, I think just from Jack and Yanni's, you know, shares, it's just emphasizing the fact that, you know, why intersectionality is so important, you know, that lens. And I also wanted to check in with you, because I remember in your quote, you talked about your son, Miles, and being neurodiverse. And I'm also adding into this, like, the racial element as well. So in terms of assumptions that are coming your way, or even maybe like, you know, lack of awareness about your experience, like, what's that like? What are the kind of common things that you notice?
I think really quickly, the masculine world that you both are talking about, Yanni and Jack, that you're exploring. My dad was actually my lead parent. My mum worked. So I grew up with this father figure that showed all of those emotions, that was this sensitive soul that I'm trying to honor for my sons. So that's very much my parenting. I just love that, like, we're all interconnected on that. Like, so when, and kind of that moment when the doctor said, you know, this is your son and he shouldn't be here, it really cemented my parenting. So when we found out that Miles was autistic when he was 2.5, there isn't really a vocabulary for autism. It's so vast, and especially in the nuance and difference of children. You know, my children are biracial, but he looks black. They both stole my face. So they really look like me. They barely look like their dad at all. It's bone of contention. So I really had to do like an amazing body of work on understanding what is the autistic spectrum, because it is so vast. What does it mean for different children? And Miles is high performing. So that means that he can do almost everything that we understand an able-bodied child can, but he is non-verbal. Not that he can't speak, part of it is through choice. He's stubborn like his mum, but he chooses when to speak. And as we understand that every person has 5 senses, and this is, you know, we can talk, we can see, Miles has the same 5 senses, but the connections don't do A to B like everybody else's. They're all different. So he might do, he might physically hit himself and not feel anything in a way that if I did it, I would, but then I can talk with a vocabulary, and his disconnect means that he can't. So it's just about understanding. So really it was for me to kind of reevaluate everything that I thought I knew about, again, being a parent, because I'd lived this idea of this is you know, this is who I thought I was going to be, and I was going to be this, and you know, me and my kids are going to do that. And then actually it's taught me how to listen. I thought I was quite a patient person, but he's really taught me how to listen and to really tune in to him and to allow him to tell me what he needs, and then to try and give a vocabulary to that. I let Miles lead a lot of what he wants to do, because he will always be able to pass on the message. I just actually have to stop enough to listen and to then interpret it. So he will, you know, he can go into most things, and he's such a quick study. So you have to, like, Miles has got an endemic memory similar to mine, that you see things once and he'll remember. So we were like, he will do a series of noises, and And that's how he can vocalize that he wants Rice Krispies, because he'll point. I didn't quite get the pointing because it was a long shot thing, but he will actually make a series of noises. And in the end, he got really frustrated with me. He went and got the chair, stood in the chair, got the Rice Krispies himself, gave me the box, and then pointed to the bowl like, "Hi, I'm hungry," and get the rest. And he was 3. So, you know, I have really learned to kind of be that layer, but then to also interpret everything that I read and adapt that to Miles, not based on what it should tell me an autistic nonverbal child should be, but to actually make that adaptation for my son. Because we, again, in a lot of things, we'll put a blank layer about what something is. We'll do that to LGBT, we'll do that to race, we'll do that to neurodiversity. I can even talk about it, like I said at the beginning, about my own medical history and polycystic ovaries, but it's individual to each individual person, and everyone will have a very different nuance to it. So I had to go and learn the basics of understanding what the vocabulary is to be his champion, but then to then interpret that for Miles and say, well, this is what you have an understanding of autism is, but this is how Miles will do it. And so then this is how we can best support Miles.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Chloe. That's really kind of leading me towards the last part of the conversation. And I wish we had more time. And this one is essentially, and you touched on it, Chloe, about the key learnings and what Miles has taught you. And I want to kind of dive a bit more before we kind of pass on to questions about this piece of LGBTQ plus parents in work, but specifically looking at the links between parenting and leadership. And I'm going to go to you, Jack. How does your experience as a parent, as an LGBTQ plus parent, actually help you in your work? You had some interesting stuff to say last time, so I'm quite curious to see how you're framing it today.
But I hope you took some notes, because I can't remember what I said last time. I think I might have said something about boundaries and limits as well, actually. Yeah, there we go. The brains, this is in the back of there somewhere, this muscle memory. Yeah, I think it's interesting how those things are two separate things, and they also merge consistently. My queerness and my parentness, there's at times where they're very distinct, but actually work is probably an environment where those things come together so much, because I work in a university. It's how I relate to my colleagues, it's how I relate to my students, because visibility for me is incredibly important in a higher education establishment, the type of university I work at. It's a small university. Our students do not come from privileged backgrounds. Many of them come from around Bradford, Leeds, Birmingham, London. The cultural, the diversity mix at my university is huge. It's amazing. And I'm the first openly queer and trans person in a leadership position at that institution. So I wear my identity on my sleeve at work a lot, because I think it's important. I'm over the hill now. I'm old. People are gonna know me as who I am. If anybody ever does fall in love with me again, it's fine. I'm not stealth in any way. I will be open, because I want other people to look at me that way. So I find the pride in my identity comes out in the workplace incredibly, because I feel that visibility, and the feedback that I get from students and colleagues is really affirming on that score. And the other thing is, because of the living, because of the full-time job of parenting, a ridiculous amount of children, which for me is not, coming from a big family, but some people look at me and think, you've got half a football team, have 4 people, that's all it is. But actually, there are limits on my time, there are limits on my brain space, there are limits on my energy and emotion. And then I impose those limits in the workplace as well. There are boundaries to my work day. I generally share my leadership spaces with men at work. There are quite a lot of women, luckily, you know, in leadership roles in Bradford, but they're not necessarily people that have children the same age. So they're not people that have younger children and children in secondary school. So it's very much kind of like, well, you know, can't you work a Saturday? Can't you work a Sunday? You should be here at 7 o'clock in the morning. Oh, we're going to have a meeting and a seminar till 8 o'clock at night. It's no, no, we're not. Because I have to feed my children. I have to feed them, but also I want to go home and see my children. I want to do bedtime. You know, I've always, no matter what restrictions and things that I've had when I was doing my PhD, if I'm traveling, bedtime is an important thing for me. I struggle with it because a lot of the time I hate it. It's really stressful. But actually, it's the time of day where, you know, we're all running around the house half naked, trying to get somebody in one bed, another bed. You know, it's for me, that's my family day. I don't get to do it in the morning, and nothing is going to keep me at work to miss that. You know, similar with birthdays, similar with other occasions. So, you know, that and then that translates to my personal life, to me wanting to have friendships, to me wanting to explore relationships as well. You know, it allows me to be more open about that in the workplace. So yeah, definitely, you know, boundaries and limits are really important. And I don't think I'd have those same boundaries and limits if I wasn't parenting and being fabulously queer everywhere at the same time.
Wow. Thank you for framing that for us, Jack. I'm going to go to Chloe briefly and then close with Yanni.
I'll be quick. I think that in that period of not thinking that I could be a parent, I actually really got to explore my identity and that love, that place of love, of that I wanted, all this love that I had to give, I gave it to my community. Like that's where it needed to go for me to kind of have that wholeness. I'm unpicking that in therapy, but that was kind of, you know, where I needed to go. So when I finally had Miles and then had Theo, that's now an inherent part of myself that fulfills me, that I don't think I'd want to turn off. I've learned how to filter it for them, but also it helps fuel everything else. Because having these two little people that are so dependent on you, like Yanni said, I am their everything. That sense of responsibility, but also that acceptance that I get from my children, that is the expectation. Like in my children's eyes, I can do no wrong. So I really want to honor that. Is again, how can I inform that? It's like a constant circle with my identity and then also my community. I think my challenge in the workplace has really come with boundaries, of not wanting to kind of do all, be all. It's not something I'm very good at, and I'm working through that. And also I think Miles has really helped that, because I've always been a bit of a fighter, but I've learned now that has to be more streamlined in certain things. So how to really champion in the right way, instead of like demanding you do this now. Actually, I've really kind of learned to be quite cute with it. And I think it's keep it cute is my mantra. But I think that has actually also really informed me in the workplace, because especially when you're a working parent, that means so much more, regardless of the other identities. When you're an LGBT working parent too, that's massive. So I think that part has really kind of cemented the work that I do, the work that I try to do, but also really informed my career, because it's the non-negotiable for me. Like that is there is a line, and that's, even if I'm rubbish at boundaries, that's the bit that I always kind of come back to. So I appreciate that if I hadn't have had children, I don't think I would ever have found this line that meant that I also internalize that and know how to take care of myself, because I have to take care for them. Like I don't want to kind of talk too much over for Yanni, but it really made therapy really important for me, because I understood if I don't get it right for me, I can't get it right for them, and they need me.
Really powerful. Thank you there, Chloe, for just adding on to what Jack added, you know, working that line of the sense of responsibility, the boundaries, and Yanni, just closing off with you, anything as to how your experience as a parent has helped you in your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Very similar sort of things that I would pick when I think about it. If I think about sort of being a queer parent and I think about leadership, I think it has made me a better leader in terms of all the dialogue and work that I've had to do with myself throughout my whole life to end up in this place where I am now. So I think I faced a lot of challenges and questions and sort of uncertainties and crossroads. And I've always been able to, in the end, to continue with other people's support, with my own support, learn to ask for help, learn to share, learn to trust myself, learn to trust other people. So I think it has made me a better leader, especially in terms of sort of human, like how to lead humans, different kind of identities and who we are as a community, and that we are all individuals, and it's sensitive and it's tender. No matter how professional we are still sensitive, tender human beings, and we need to be seen and we need connection. So that's something that I think I'm able to do pretty well, and it's because of my journey as a queer person and as a queer parent, and it's something that I'm also very proud of. Yeah.
Wow, such beautiful words to end on. I mean, I can't even thank you enough. And like Cara, I'll be going back to, thank goodness we managed to record this time, Michael, because I'm so excited. I really will keep going back to this, and listening to you all has been so transformational. Just sitting here, I've been sweating, I've been excited, I've been all sorts of things. And I know that we had a question there from BJ, just talking about how parenting related to your own healing and repairing journey. But I think from everything that we heard, whether it was from a somatic level, your bodies, your identities, and moving through and navigating this world, it was all just so powerful and healing. So I'm just going to stop there and say, just before we wrap up, thank you everyone who just joined. Thank you everyone for being curious about this topic. I think we can't talk about it enough. We will definitely be doing a part 2, and I don't know, a whole workshop on it, whatever we need to do to just get this conversation going even further. But please, everyone, join us next month as we host more of these conversations. But really, my gratitude goes out to you all, Chloe, Yanni, Jack. Like, you don't understand how powerful this is. And so I can't find the words for just, you being your whole selves in this space and how much it helps me and other people. So any last words from you before we go?
Thank you, Maylis.
Yeah, thank you just for creating this space. It's as meaningful for me as well. I think every chance to sort of explore and these questions and share it with other people who have similar kind of experience, it's not a guarantee, and it's not happening every day. So this is really, really, really important and nurturing.
And to meet other queer parents, like,
you're there, you're out.
No, but honestly, like, to have other parents like myself that you can talk to about stuff, and you will have a shared commonality and get it. Like, that's so important as parents. Parents need friends. Queer parents especially need friends.
I will definitely have you all on speed dial, okay?
When they all start turning teenagers, just come back to me, because I'm in that process now.
I'm coming to you first. Yanni, I've got you through the preteens.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful, everyone. So we're going to wrap up here.
Thank you.
Everyone, wish you a lovely, lovely day. And see you next time for the next round.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye.